Hello, and welcome to this main stage discussion at Blackboard World, BB World. What's next in higher education post-COVID? What does the future hold? I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed, and I'm the moderator for today's discussion. I hope we'll be able to find something to talk about. It's been such a boring time, and there's really total clarity and certainty about the current environment. But seriously, this is a remarkable moment, both because of what we've all endured over the last 15 months and because of the instability and unpredictability of what's ahead. I think it's a time of both great opportunity, but also of potential challenge for colleges, students, and all of us. To help us sort of puzzle through these issues are thoughtful academic administrators from a range of institutions. I'm joined today by Norman Duncan, who's Vice Principal and Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic at the University of Pretoria, Justin Lauder, who's Associate Vice Provost for e-learning at Texas Tech University, and Anthony Wuto, who's Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Howard University. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here. I thought we'd start by trying to get a sense of kind of where you all view how you all view the impact of this most recent period. I'm curious, and we'll maybe go in alphabetical order, starting with you, Dr. Duncan. What is the single biggest impact that the events of the last 15 months, the pandemic, the recession that flowed from it, the national and international reckoning with racial justice that we've seen since last summer, has had both on your institution and on the higher education ecosystem broadly, recognizing that we're in early days and that it may be too early to judge this in its entirety. But Dr. Duncan, do you have some initial thoughts on that?
Yes, certainly, Doug. I suppose I can start off by saying that, the pandemic and everything associated with the pandemic had affected all aspects of academic life, as far as I can see, at our university as well as other universities in South Africa. Certainly, it has influenced or impacted the way in which students could live through the university experience. So the mode of being a student had changed completely. The mode of being an academic and instructor had changed completely. The budgets of universities had to change and be reallocated. And of course, the way in which we use our physical infrastructure had changed. And finally, teaching and learning, which is really a key aspect of my portfolio. It had fundamentally changed how we pursued the agenda of teaching and learning. Whereas prior to the lockdowns that accompanied the pandemic, we had been targeting or favoring a hybrid system of teaching and learning. In other words, one half online, one half or part of it in contact mode. With the pandemic, of course, we had to move everything online. Fortunately, we have been using, obviously, our LMS, the Blackboard LMS, for many years, and we have been encouraging our lecturers to increasingly utilize online affordances. The passage for them from hybrid to fully online was fairly smooth, but it came with a number of obstacles. And if you want me to speak about this later, I'll certainly do so.
It sounds like you were further ahead than a lot of institutions in already being pretty heavily blended. That's interesting. Justin, how do things look to you at Texas Tech?
I think it's a great question, Doug, and I would agree with my colleague, Dr. Duncan. It's changed every aspect of the way we do academics, or we provide instruction and research. One big thing that we have seen is a number of students that got comfortable learning fully online, that are unsure about returning to campus-based instruction in the fall, and the same with faculty who many who had never taught online or hybrid before the pandemic and realized how much they enjoyed that modality of instruction. And so they are now asking for ways to keep teaching hybrid or fully online so they can engage with their students that way. I think those are some of the big things, but when you think about the overall kind of ecosystem that we're living in, I think my world is predominantly with online programs, and because this has been, some have been very successful with online learning. Some schools have been not that successful with online learning. And so I think one thing we're going to have to wrestle with is, again, the perception that online or distance is lesser than face to face. And so I think that's another area we're going to have to think through as we move back into whatever the new normal is going to be.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we'll come back to that question of whether the sort of shift and the sort of forced experimentation by just about everybody with virtual forms of learning has been sort of good or bad in terms of sort of driving embrace of technology enabled learning. I think we can come back to that in a minute. Anthony, at Howard, how has where do you think where have you seen the biggest impacts of the last 15 months?
Sure, and I agree with Dr. Duncan and Justin that we have seen a circumstance where almost everything that we do academically and at the institution has been impacted. And Howard, we also have health professional programs. And so we had the unique circumstance where our undergraduate students were completely moved online, and initially so were our health professional students, but we had to move to a circumstance to have health professional students on campus to be able to engage in their clinical experiences. But one of the things that I think was an impact as well. Howard, like many other institutions, was already moving a number of programs online and creating more online courses. And I think what the pandemic really did was forced us to accelerate that process. And we've for some time have had a Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, and we've had faculty participate in training both with Blackboard and other online technologies. And we had to create a crash course to move everybody online over really a week during spring break. But what I've started seeing as we're returning more towards a more normal circumstances, we've really started to see a bifurcation with our students. A number of students, the majority of students, particularly the undergrads, were clamoring to return to campus and clamoring to return to an environment with other students face to face. But we've had a number of students, as Justin had mentioned, who said, hey, I like this online experience. I have enjoyed engaging online, whether because of my family circumstances or because I'm saving money, not having to pay for room and board or to move to another part of the country. A number of students have indicated that they would prefer to remain online, as have our faculty, a significant number of faculty. So I think we're entering a new phase where we're figuring out the best configuration, how much we can accommodate a transition to additional courses online, and how much of our content really needs to remain face to face.
So let's maybe take some of these issues kind of one at a time, and maybe because I think it's clear that this has changed, or at least potentially changed, the landscape for different groups in different ways. Let's maybe start with students. You've all talked a little bit about what you sense so far in terms of student expectations, demands, preferences. If we assume, as it sounds like you're sensing so far, that there will be at least somewhat increased interest in and desire to at the very least have continue to have blended options, if not fully online options. I've been sort of assuming that we wouldn't necessarily see a major shift or major increase in the number of people wanting to study fully online, but would probably see the most movement among those insisting on, or at least greatly preferring, and maybe being unhappy if they don't have the option to learn remotely sometimes. So I'm curious, maybe from each of you, and again, it sounds like Norman, it sounds like you had already been a pretty heavily blended institution. I think probably more than the others, and probably more than many institutions that I know of. But maybe start with the others first. Do you think, if that's the case, first of all, is that the case? Do you think there's it's more interest in blended? Do you feel like your institutions can meet that demand and can do so at the level of quality that students in general are likely to accept? Maybe Justin, start with you.
Sure. So Texas Tech was fortunate. We had a number of fully online programs pre-pandemic, and then moving online. At least about 80% of our campus, about 40,000 students, or 80% of our students, 80% of the 40,000 took at least one online class a semester. So they at least had that background and familiarity. But what I've started to see is students in programs that were not offered at a distance or hybrid, or those are the ones that are really asking for that. Another issue that is coming up with students in particular is the issue of access. Where Texas Tech is, we are in the panhandle of Texas, fairly remote locations for students throughout West Texas, and some of them did not have decent access to internet through the pandemic, and so now you're dealing with students that may want to continue to learn at home or off campus, but they may not have reliable access to internet. So you're having to think through things like that. And then, as others have said, we're having to think through, how we are designing some of these courses that were not done online pre-pandemic, and so that for post-pandemic, or whatever post-pandemic might look like, they are built in a quality and strong online pedagogy manner. We tell faculty it takes at minimum 3 months, if not 6, to develop a really good and high quality online or hybrid course, and we had them do it in 2 weeks in the spring, and so wanted to make sure that students are not missing out on any kind of the academic rigor that they would expect is one area that I think we need to think through with students, and how this will impact their learning as we move forward.
Sure, and we'll turn to the faculty role in a few minutes, but a lot of what I heard in the last year or so, especially, was that it was the blended courses that presented some of the biggest challenges to instructors, because there were some number who had experience teaching online, obviously many who had experience teaching in the classroom, a lot fewer, I think, who had experience teaching in a blended format and serving both audiences with equitably and equally. Anthony at Howard, how are you feeling about your ability to meet what may be sort of altered student expectations and demands? And first of all, tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of that demand so far.
Sure, we are seeing, particularly among the undergrads, but also with several of our graduate and professional programs, students who are expressing an interest and a desire to continue to learn online. As I mentioned, we have been pivoting to increase the number of online courses and the number of online programs, and we're really looking to accelerate that pace. We've created a new process for consideration of new programs, and one of the expectations, if not requirements, is that new programs would either have to have a significant online component, or we're looking at programs that are entirely online. So we want to continue to serve our students who are expressing an interest in additional online courses and programming, and we believe that there's a broader audience that we can also support if we continue to accelerate that online presence. So that's certainly something that is part of our planning, and it's part of our efforts, and we're looking to continue in that direction as quickly and as significantly as we can.
And then Norman, it's, again, if I heard you right, you said that many, if not most, of your courses were delivered in a hybrid format pre-pandemic, and again, that sounds like that positioned you pretty well. Do you anticipate going back to that, or do you think more of your programs will end up staying entirely online? And I'm interested, maybe for those institutions that maybe had less experience with hybrid, what have been the secrets to or tactics that you've had in terms of really ensuring sort of equitable kind of learning in a hybrid format, whether students are in person or remote?
Doug, I must just first clarify that in our context, hybrid actually means that all students are exposed to both online and in contact mode. And we had to prepare for, at least we had to encourage a lot of staff, as from 2014 already, to make sure that all the lectures, all the modules could be offered in hybrid mode. Now, what happened in South Africa in 2016 facilitated the process of becoming increasingly hybrid, because you might recall the student protests of 2016, 2017 in South Africa, when most universities had to close, because we know that university education is so expensive, we could not afford to lose that year. And then we had to start moving online. And I think it's at that point when the penny dropped for many academics at our university in South Africa that we would increasingly have to make use of e-technology, online resources, in order to continue with the project of education when circumstances do not allow for a contact mode of education. Now, I must add as well, Doug, that many people in academia are very resistant to change. I mean, we always want to do the things the way our parents experienced them, or the way in which we were taught when we were students at university. But the world moves on, and we have to adjust to changes and different needs of young people. I can be honest and say that even at UP, so a number of academics were not comfortable with us moving completely online, but there was no alternative. We could not open universities. It was a matter of life or death. And so they increasingly had to go online. The same applies to students. We had students complaining bitterly because they were not going to have a campus experience. But as time moved on, I think many people became used to this reality for the moment. My personal ideal is that we will continue in hybrid mode into the future, in other words, for the immediate future, not for the indefinite future, because I think, as my colleagues have indicated, we will increasingly have to make accommodation for young people who prefer online. And I think a number of writers in higher education have said this over and over again, that the future is flexible, that we should meet the differing needs of students. And that future, therefore, means that some students will require the possibility of continuing in contact mode, and other students, we should reshape what we do in such a way that those students who want to get the instruction via online modes, that we should make accommodations for them as well. And so, yes, there's going to be an increase in online instruction, but I think the successful universities, the universities that will meet the needs of their diverse student bodies, will accommodate for the varying needs and the diverse needs and preferences of their students.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I mean, your student protests, I'm sure they were difficult, but sounds like they gave you a test run at a concept of what I've heard more and more conversation about, which is academic continuity. I've had conversations with people in the States who are in California, where there are frequent forest fires shutting down institutions, or goodness knows the hurricanes and tornadoes that we have in certain parts of this country that shut down the Gulf Coast in the South for stretches of time. And I think that the pandemic obviously affected everybody in a major way, and maybe put that topic more squarely front and center. But I think it's going to be it's hard to imagine an institution not having a plan going forward for academic continuity in a way that they probably always have for sort of business continuity of various kinds. I want to shift to sort of the faculty role and the impact on faculty members. And I guess want to consider it in the framing of, I have suspected and frankly worried about whether or not we obviously saw institutions adapt very quickly, surprisingly quickly, from a lot of people's view, and fully to the pandemic when there really was no choice. And I guess one of the questions to me right now is, how much backsliding will there be? How much will we see people want to go back to the old ways? And I think, again, faculty members probably had more comfort now than they used to. But I guess I'm interested in sort of your perceptions of your faculty's attitudes. We have, in recent years, even as we've seen the number of faculty members and the proportion of faculty members that have experienced teaching virtually increase, we haven't really seen more appreciation for the quality of online education. We've seen in the surveys we've done, we've seen that the proportion of faculty members who think online education can be equally as good, not really move very much. And I'm curious what you think the impact has been on your campuses of has the experimentation that faculty members were forced to do with online and other forms of technology-enabled education changed faculty attitudes? Anthony, maybe start with you.
Sure, and maybe I'll make two comments. The first is that I think this has been the silver lining in the educational pandemic cloud for us, that we have, as I've mentioned, have long wanted to move more towards online instruction. And really the significant impediment was our faculty, who were very reluctant to do so, who were very used to and accustomed to traditional teaching pedagogies, and having to move online abruptly and suddenly, for many of them created an experience that they realized that, hey, this isn't so bad, or there are a number of things in this experience that I think can be beneficial to me, to our students, and I'm at least willing to try this in a broader way. But the other comment I'll make is my educational technologists always have pointed out to me over the last couple of months that what we had to do very rapidly was emergency remote instruction, and not true online learning. So they've cautioned me that we should understand that in order to do online instruction well, we really need to invest more in the faculty training and experience. And we need to make sure that we surveyed our students every several weeks, every couple of months, regarding their experience, how courses were going. And we did the same thing with faculty. And for the majority of our courses, the students thought things were going well, their experience was good. But for some courses, it was not as good. And those were largely faculty who were not experienced in online instruction. So while we certainly want to continue to move in that direction, we have to make sure that our faculty receive the requisite training, and no one has the misperception that, oh, I've taught online and I can continue to do it this way without really having that expertise and training that is necessary to do it well.
Justin, did the quality of the learning, or of the instruction at least, get better from last spring when, as you noted, everybody noted, we had to pivot on a dime and institutions had to get things up fast, and sort of, not quality be damned, but without speed was the primary factor. Last fall, spring, now this coming fall, have we seen continuing improvement and continuing embrace of the idea that what passed for emergency remote learning last in spring of 2020 wasn't going to necessarily meet student expectations, which inevitably are going to be rising and continuing to rise. And do you think faculty members appreciate that? And are they at a time when I'm sure everybody is exhausted because of a year or more of just a constant sprint? Is there the continued willingness to keep working and to keep making it better?
Yeah, I think Anthony is absolutely correct. Last spring, it was emergency remote, and it was get something online so that students could continue and finish out the semester. But once we did that through the spring, we turned to helping faculty build more quality courses for the summer and fall of 2020 and into the spring of 2021. So I think you're exactly right, Doug, is that as we moved through the pandemic in the last 18 months or so, what started as emergency instruction has now moved into, for the most part, quality online instruction. There are still some pockets of faculty that think, what they did spring 2020 is all they have to do. But for the most part, I have seen faculty and their willingness to improve what they were doing in the spring so that their students were getting this high quality education from either online or hybrid. I also think we have seen a willingness, or I have seen a willingness of faculty to try even new things. We've rolled out some new technologies and some new services through Blackboard, and we have faculty that pre-pandemic probably wouldn't have tried anything new, and now they are jumping on these new tools because they see ways to connect with their students that they didn't have before. So yeah, I think we've improved as we've gone on, and hopefully that will continue with our fully online classes and our hybrid classes, where we find ways to make that connection with our students and our content and our instructors.
Over the last year, we've seen students from disadvantaged backgrounds be disproportionately affected by the pandemic, more likely to get knocked off course, to unenroll, to not enroll from the start. And we know that historically underrepresented students of various kinds may not fare as well in certain kinds of technology-enabled learning. And so if we're heading into a period where we're going to have more of that, more online, more virtual, more remote, more blended, what do we do in how we deliver technology-enabled learning? What can we do to make sure that it serves and doesn't further disadvantage students who are already disadvantaged in our education system? Maybe Norman, start with you.
Last year, Doug, when we were in the thick of things, and we realized that students could not afford data, that many of them did not have laptops. The university had to provide data, and it purchased laptops for indigent students, but it also went into partnerships with business. And I think that might be something that might have a more enduring impact, or it's something that would be more sustainable. We entered into negotiations and discussions with cell phone providers as well around the data issue. And it solved some of the problems for last year. But I do think that we will have to have some new arrangement with providers, new arrangement with technology companies to make these resources more affordable to particularly poorer students from marginalized backgrounds. Because we cannot say we want to go back to the old way of doing things, of having only contact classes to accommodate students who have been neglected or placed on the margins of society. Because if we're going to go back to contact, we're disadvantaging those students once again. They need the resources that that more affluent students have at their disposal. So my argument would be one has to engage in discussions with providers to see how one can make these resources more affordable to students from poor backgrounds, as affordable as it would be to students from affluent backgrounds. I do think that all our students need a chance to be successful, and so that is where I would put in much of my energy.
Mm-hmm. Norman focused on sort of the digital divide issues. Anthony and Justin, Anthony maybe first. Can you talk about kind of from issues related to design and to student support and other things that sort of you think we need to do, your institutions need to do to ensure that disadvantaged students aren't further disadvantaged by a greater dependence on technology in delivering learning?
Sure. And, I think one of the things that we have to remember from this period is we were dealing with multiple crises that overlapped, starting with the pandemic and the global health crisis, and then in this country, the systemic racism reckoning and social justice issues, as well as the recession. And so one of the significant impacts we saw on our students were mental health challenges. We had a significant a dramatic increase in students who were expressing mental health concerns, and we had to increase our staffing and provide additional services to them. And I think it more adversely impacted students who didn't have financial means. So similar to Norman, we provided hundreds of devices to students once we identified that they needed technology support, and we provided additional Wi-Fi access. But I think we really will need to continue to look at students, both those who need additional technological support, those who need additional support, whether it's mental health. There were a number of students who had never been online before, and just being in an online environment was a crisis for them, and learning to transition to an online environment. So the majority of our students prefer and want to be on campus, but I think that is as much because of the social support that they felt, and being in a physical environment, not being in an apartment with 3 children and 2 other family members, having space to be able to study. And so that's the other critical element, that in addition to the technology, making sure that our students have an environment where they can be successful above and beyond being able to access online instruction.
And Justin, probably might be our last word.
I was just going to say, one thing that I think we've also seen with our students is their resilience, and that they have persevered. I have an example. We had a student that lived in a remote part of Texas, and the only place they could get internet signal was on top of the water tower at their ranch. And so they would go up there to do their homework and submit homework. So I think that's the resilient nature of our students. They have found a way, and they persisted. And I completely agree with Anthony and Norman. We need to provide these resources and services to our students so that they are successful no matter what modality that they're learning in.
Somebody mentioned a silver lining before. I think it was Anthony, and one of the silver linings to me was that I think faculty members, particularly who were the front lines for your institutions, I think gained an increased recognition maybe than they had before about their students as people, and as people dealing with lots of with life and with circumstances in a way that might not have been clear when people were traipsing into and out of a classroom after 50 minutes. And I'm sort of hopeful that recognition will help to feed the sort of growing recognition of the need to serve students in all ways to as we head forward. So I really appreciate, we're pretty much out of time, but I wanted to thank Norman Duncan of the University of Pretoria, Justin Lauder, Texas Tech University, and Anthony Wuto, Howard University for your insights here. Thanks to Blackboard for hosting the session, and hope all of you stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.